Hello everyone, my name is Nadeem and today I will teach you on how to study for the US Customs Broker exam. Under this course, I will tell you the exact techniques which you need to learn if you want to pass this exam. And everything I tell you, it's based on my own experience. It's nothing I learned from somewhere else. It's nothing I just picked up because of other people talking about it. It's everything based on what I did to pass the Customs Broker exam. Now, back in 2019, I took the exam and the exam had less than 4% pass rate. I was able to take the exam once and I was able to pass the exam without having anyone teach me about the exam itself. In this course, I am going to tell you exactly what I did and what you need to do if you want to pass this exam as well. So let's move on to the next slide. Now, before we jump onto the exam itself, I want to take 2 moments and talk to you briefly about VTC, also known as Victory Compliance. VTC was founded in 2020 to help people like you, to help you grow, to help you expand, to help you progress on your career. We do this by providing trainings, seminars, and in-person courses as well. If you find this course helpful, then please go to LinkedIn and tell everyone how amazing VTC really is. And I really do appreciate it, so thank you so much. Now we can talk about the exam. So, why are you here today? Why are you watching this video, or why do you want to pass this Customs Broker exam and get that LCB designation? And does it really matter? Does your background matter? Does it matter when you take the exam? Does it matter what happens afterwards? So, there could be many reasons why you're here, right? Number 1, you don't really have a job, so you heard about trade compliance, and taking this exam and passing it will kind of show your future employers that you know something about customs, so you want to pass this exam and enter into this field as your first job. Or on the other hand, maybe you're already on a career pathway, but it's not trade compliance. So you want to take this exam, pass it, and kind of jump into this field even though you weren't in it before. Or it could be because you're already in this field, but you want to get that LCB or Customs Broker designation, or you want to get that salary increase or the promotion that you really want, but you haven't really received so far. So this might help you kind of jump over that hoop. And I guess the real question is, does it matter at the end? Let's find out on the next slide. What is the solution? And again, does it really matter where you come from? Is it going to help you pass the exam if you already have some trade compliance experience? Is it going to work to your disadvantage if you don't have any trade compliance experience? To be completely honest with you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether this is your first job, it doesn't matter whether you're coming from another field, and it doesn't matter if you're in the field and you just want to take it to make some kind of progress. At the end, this is not going to work to your advantage or disadvantage, in my opinion. And the reason for that is because this exam, it's not about memorization. So what do I mean by that? So as we go on through this course, you will realize that this exam is not about memorization at all. It doesn't expect you to memorize anything. In fact, let me give you an example. I personally took the 2019 October exam. That exam had less than 4% pass rate. I was able to take the exam once and able to pass the exam on my first shot without anyone teaching me about these topics or how to pass the exam. So how did I end up doing it? The thing is, as I studied for the exam, as I began studying, at first couple of weeks, first 2 weeks, I tried to memorize everything. But over time, I realized there's no point in memorizing everything, because as you try to memorize more things, everything gets jumbled inside your head. So it doesn't matter, even if you try to memorize anything, by the time you finish studying for the exam, everything is going to be so jumbled inside your head that you won't know what the right answer is, which information belongs to what. So I learned that there's no point in trying to memorize anything at all. In fact, when I was studying for this exam, I did not try to memorize a single thing after those first 2 weeks. And as I mentioned, I was able to pass the October 2019 exam on my first shot. So if not memorization, then what is this about? Let's talk about that at the next slide. Before I go into the techniques of how you can study or what you can do exactly to make sure you pass, let's talk about the exam itself. What is it? How many questions does it have? How much do you need to pass? So the exam itself has 80 questions. Out of those 80 questions, you need to get 60 right, which is a 75%. So how long is the exam itself? The exam itself is 4.5 hours. When I took 2019 exam, I only had 4 hours, so you get half an hour extra. But remember that 4.5 hours, it includes the beginning time when they give you instructions on how to actually take the exam, and that 4.5 hours is going to also include any breaks you take. So for example, if you get up and go to the bathroom and then you come back, that timer, that 4.5 hours is still going to be running. It doesn't pause when you leave. So every time you get up and leave and come back, I would highly recommend that you keep an eye on that timing, because when you leave and come back, every single time you leave and you want to enter the room again, they will actually physically check you to make sure that you're not bringing anything in that you cannot bring in. So even though you're allowed to bring in any physical copies, any papers, whether it's old exams, whether it's notes, whether it's handwritten notes, you can bring those in. But you still cannot bring in any electronics, perhaps, except a basic calculator. And the reason for that is because obviously they don't want you to cheat in a way where you're contacting someone else to get the correct answers. But otherwise, the exam is open book. But like I said, I would highly recommend that every single time you leave the exam room, keep an eye on the timer. Every time you come back, check that timer, and then throughout the whole exam, you have to keep an eye on the timer, because that 4.5 hours, it's going to go by fast. So what happens if you don't pass the exam? Let's talk about that on the next slide. So what do you do if you don't get those 60 questions right? What do you do if you don't pass with at least a 75% pass score? If for some reason you don't pass the exam, then you have 2 chances of appealing. Technically third one, but I would highly recommend do it only twice. And for some reason, if you can't get points back, figure out if really the third option would be worth it or not. So once you get that decision letter telling you that you failed the exam, if you happen to fail the exam, you can appeal that exam decision a couple of times. So the first time you have 60 days to do the first appeal. What is that appeal like? In that appeal, you can write an official appeal. They'll tell you exactly what you need to do, what information you need to submit for that appeal, and how to format everything. So you can submit an appeal within 60 days, and custom will go back and look at that appeal and try to figure out if there's any reason on why your appeal would work or why it makes sense. If for some reason they agree with you, whether it's based on the question was poorly worded, whether it's because your answer was the better choice, whatever the reason is, you can put that in the appeal. They will take a look at that appeal, and then they will come back to you and tell you whether they're going to grant you any extra points or not. If for some reason they grant you only a couple of points but not all, or if they don't grant you any points after the first appeal, you can actually appeal again the second time. When you submit your appeal the second time, your appeal is looked into by someone else besides the people who looked at it the first time. So again, you'll have 60 days to submit the appeal the second time. For some reason, if you still don't get enough points back where you pass the exam and you want to go for the third option would be to take CBP to court and actually fight for your points for some reason, whether you believe you have the best answer, whether you don't think there was any right answer, whatever your reasoning is, you can actually take CBP to court. Now, when it comes to the first appeal decision, usually CBP can take up to 1 to 3 months. And sometimes they can even take as much time as until the next exam is going to come by. So for example, if you take the October exam, you might not get a decision for the first appeal until almost maybe a couple days before the next April exam. On the other hand, when you submit the appeal the second time, they may take 1 or 2 years to come back to you and tell you a decision whether you got any points back or not. And when it comes to taking CBP to the court, it's probably going to cost you a lot just to go through the whole process. So I would highly recommend appeal the first time, appeal the second time. Both times, if you're more than 4 points away, then I would highly recommend you register for the next exam and go through the appeal process at the same time. That way, you're not waiting for CBP to tell you whether you passed or failed, because if they happen to tell you still failed, then you'll kind of skip out on the next exam, and that's only gonna, increase the amount of time it takes you to pass the exam. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about the exam itself. What type of questions do they actually have on the exam, and what is the reason why you don't need to memorize anything at all? Like I mentioned to you at the beginning of the course, this exam is not about memorization. So let's look at the type of questions they give you. I'll also show you the examples of these type of questions. Number one, I like to call these hide and seek. For these type of questions, these questions are based purely on finding the regulation. So these questions don't test you on whether you know the stuff or not. They don't test you on whether you have memorized anything or not. They test you on how fast you can find the right answer. So they will ask you a question. You have to go to the regulation or one of the required material, find the answer, and choose the answer. There's no other thing you need to do. Now the second type of question. The second type of question is a math type of question, also known as valuation. In these type of questions, they will ask you to calculate something involving math. It could be duty calculation, it could be MPF calculation, HMF calculation, invoice value calculation, what's declared to customs calculation. Pretty much it's a math question. With these type of questions, you need to understand what equation to use, which, by the way, I provide you in one of my other lectures about evaluation. You need to kind of understand what information they're giving you and what information you need to use or extract or take out or add into that formula to get to the right answer. The third type of question is known as classification. In the classification questions, they will ask you to classify goods by an HTS code or Schedule B code. Sometimes they ask you how to classify goods by Schedule B code, but mainly they will ask you the classification or the HTS code of the importing goods. For these type of questions, you need to understand and know the GRIs, also known as General Rules of Interpretation. If you know how to use the GRIs, chapter and section notes of the HTS book, then you can classify these goods very easily. The fourth type of question are agreements. When I say agreements, these are free trade agreements, which are agreements between two different countries, in our case US and some other country, which kind of are special provisions that allow importing of goods under a reduced or a free duty rate. So every single agreement has different rules and regulation. I go into more details about how to study for the FTAs, but overall I would highly recommend that rather than trying to memorize these FTAs and all of these different types of rules and regulation, which will get jumbled up inside your head later, try to memorize, or rather not try to memorize, try to understand what these FTAs contain, what sections they contain, and where you need to go to find the information if you need to look up an FTA. Otherwise, the only thing you'll be doing is wasting time on the exam. So on the next slide, I'll show you a couple of examples for these type of questions. This is the first example you see. This is an example of the hide and seek type of question. Let's read the question itself. The following statements are all true except. In this case, they're asking you the statement that is false. So what do? You go to your regulation that you're carrying with you probably. You go to that regulation and then you look up every single answer choice. If you can find it, if it looks correct, that's not your answer. If you cannot find a regulation, for some reason there's a regulation which is misworded or somehow not the right wording, that would be your answer. In this case, you would just go to the section which you feel like the answer is going to come from, look up the answer, compare both the regulation to the answer choices, and figure out which one is false. That is it. There's literally nothing else for you to do except look up the regulation as fast as you can. That's pretty much it. Now, the next type of question. This is a valuation type of question. Let's read the question itself. If the total entered value were to increase by 15,000, what would be the new merchandise processing fee total amount owed on the CBP form 7501? In this case, they're pretty much asking you to calculate how much the MPF would be. It would be 15,000 times the MPF percentage, and obviously you have to look at what the minimum is and what the maximum is. So again, this is a math type of question. This question in this case is a pretty simple basic question, but sometimes it can get very complicated. So you have to understand how to actually tackle the question and which equation to use rather than just times something or divide something. Classification. Let's go through the question and read that as well. What is the classification for a woven scarf containing 75% silk and 25% cotton with all four sides that are 55 centimeters in length? In this case, they're asking you to classify the woven scarf. They give you the percentage of material that makes up the scarf and the dimensions of the scarf as well. In this case, you have to go to the HTS book and then you have to figure out what the HTS is going to be using the GRIs, using the chapter notes as well as the section notes as well. This example is for the agreements or FTAs. Which of the following has an MPF non-exempt requirement? Which is pretty much asking you which agreement can be applied but it does not reduce the MPF that you pay for the importing goods. Again, for this, you have to know where the free trade agreements are. You have to know which section to jump at. You have to understand and kind of know which section talks about MPF. As long as you can find that, then you pretty much jump to the regulation, look at each FTA and see which one shows the fact that MPF does not get reduced even though this agreement might apply. Okay? Now, what do you do? Let's talk about that on the next section. So, what do you actually need for the exam? When I say what do you need, I'm talking about the actual material, whether it's electronic, whether it's physical, what do you actually need? Before we talk about the material, I do want you to know that CBP has all the regulation or all the required regulation which you need for the exam in electronic format on the computer that you use. But I would highly recommend that you use physical copies when you practice, as well as you take your physical copies of the regulation and everything that you have inside to the exam. Because by the time you take the exam, you'll be used to using your own regulation. And to be honest, a lot of the stuff that CBP provides you, if you try to use that, then it's going to cause technical glitches as well. So, number one, I would say you need pens, highlighters, and tabs. Pens, obviously, for taking notes. Highlighter, I would highly recommend you use highlighters efficiently and not just highlight everything with the same color. And then when it comes to tabbing, what I'm talking about is the label tabbing. So you have to label stuff the way it works for you. I'll talk about labeling in a tiny bit. So what do you need when it comes to regulation? You usually need the 19 CFR, the HS book, right to make entry, ACE entry summary instructions, and ACE business rules. You need all these regulations, and every single question that comes, it'll come from these requirements or these books. And then, to be honest, you just need your brain. As long as you can think and understand things and how to tackle this exam, you can pass the exam just like I did. What next? Now let's assume that you have everything that you need. You have the pens, the highlighters, the labeling tabs, you have all the regulation. What do you do next? Now, you have to understand this step is probably the most important step that you can take. If you do this right, it's going to make you, if you do this right, it's going to make you. On the other hand, if you do it wrong, it's going to break you. So many people put in so much effort to study for this exam, but they skip out on this step or don't do it the right way. And that's why even though they spend so much time, so much money, at the end they fail the exam. In order to pass the exam, the first thing that you need to do really is, the most important thing that you need to do is have an action plan. What do I mean by that? So when I say you need to have an action plan, that means you have to understand how far out the exam is, how many days or how much time you have left to study, and actually make a plan for your studies. If you skip out on that plan, if you slack on that plan, then you're just cheating on yourself, you're lying to yourself. And if you actually skip out on that plan, then at the end, there's no reason why you would pass the exam. So make sure you have an action plan, you are realistic with that action plan, then you actually follow that action plan, which means take the exam that you want to take, understand the concept you want to understand. So by the time it's time for you to take the exam, you actually are as ready as you wanted to be. If you skip out on this portion, action plan, which a lot of people do, then it's gonna harm you a lot at the end. Trust me. I've seen a lot of people study for this exam, and this is the one thing that they miss out on. Now you have your goodies, you have an action plan, you know what to do. You take your books, you open your books. What's the next step? The next step, and the second most important thing, is probably labeling everything properly. Like I've already told you many times, this exam is purely on how fast you can find the right answer and understanding some of the concepts. It's not about memorization. So how do you find stuff quick? You have to make sure you categorize it properly. You label stuff in the way that makes most sense to you. Now, for this slide, I'm going to tell you how I labeled everything. It's based on my own experience, something to help me pass the exam. And like I already mentioned, it doesn't matter where you come from. If you tackle this exam properly, then you will pass this exam. I'm just being honest with that. So let's talk about the 19th CFR and how you can go about labeling it. In the 19th CFR, you want to make sure you have labeled a lot of the sections which are tested most of the time. So if you look at the slide, all these sections under 19th CFR, these are probably the main sections which CBP always tests you on. You have to go to each of these sections, put a label on each section, and make sure you identify the label properly, such as, for example, Part 111, just as example, broker. Part 134, 136, country of origin. Make sure you label things properly so that way you can quickly get to that section and find the regulation that you need to find. The HTS book. The HTS book, I feel like it's divided into three big sections. First is the introduction plus the general notes, and then is the actual classification HTS codes, and then at the end it has indexes as well. So you need to open the HTS book, and number one, you need to label where the GRIs are, which are general rules of interpretation, which are used for classification. You need to put a label on that. Next, you need to go to the general notes, which, when I say GNs or general notes, those are pretty much all the trade agreements which are applicable to the US. So you need to go to every single one of those GNs and you need to label that, for example, GN1, GN2, GN3, GN4, and you also need to write the country it's associated with. For example, if there's a agreement that's associated with US, Mexico, then write GN number, Mexico, GN number, Canada, GN number, Jordan, stuff like that. So make sure you label every single GN note. Now, after the general notes, you have Schedule B. The Schedule B comes right before the actual Chapter 1 HTS codes, and it's labeled as Notice to Exporters. Okay, make sure you label that, because sometimes they ask you to classify the Schedule B and not the importing HTS code. Then after that comes the section and chapter. Make sure you go ahead and label every single section, meaning 1 through section 22, label them all, and then make sure you label every single chapter from chapter 1 through 97. Okay, when it comes to chapter 98 and 99, chapter 98 and 99 are divided into subchapters, so you have to make sure you label every single subchapter. Go to the first page of the subchapter, label that. Okay, and then after the chapter 99, you have the indexes, so make sure you label every single index with a separate tab as well. And then when it comes to other regulations such as right to make entry as business rules, on those, make sure you label every single section as well. That's going to help you a lot. So over here, I have a couple of slides which show you exactly what some of that stuff looks like, or at least the top of the page, what it looks like when it comes to labeling. So over here, you can see the general rules of interpretation. That's where the GRIs are. And then this is actually showing you the notice of exporter, which is also known as Schedule B codes. With Schedule B codes, if you go to this notice of exporter and you read exactly what it says is that most of the exporting Schedule B codes are the same as importing HTS codes. So if you see a Schedule B number under this notice, that means it's different than the importing HTS code. On the other hand, if you don't see a Schedule B number listed under this section, then the Schedule B number is the same as importing HTS code, which can be found under the regular chapters. Now, this over here is showing you an example, or kind of like where the general notes begin. Number one on the left side over here, it's just showing you this is GN1. The number two is showing you that this is GN2. Next, this is showing you the example of how the section notes begin. You will see section 1 at the top. It will tell you the title of the section. So go to each section, section 1 through 22, and make sure you put a label on each section note. Now over here, this is an example of what the chapter notes looks like, or at least the beginning of it. Go through each chapter notes, and for chapter 98 and 99, make sure you label subchapters on those. Make sure you label from chapter 1 to chapter 97, label each chapter. Then when it comes to chapter 98 and 99, make sure you label the subchapters. Over here, this is just an example of the subchapter for chapter 98. And then this over here is the subchapter for chapter 99. So once you have all of these things labeled, what's next? Now, this is where the real fun begins. After you have everything labeled properly, and I do mean properly, make sure you label everything properly. And just going back to the previous slide, I would also suggest that make sure you label all the sections in one color, so that way you know exactly where each section is beginning in the HTS book. Now, after you have labeled everything, now this is where the fun begins. What does that mean? Now is the time to practice, okay? What you need to do is you can either go to CBLE's website or my own website, and you can download the old exams as well as the old exam answer keys. You need to download that, and you actually need to start doing those old exams as practice. I would highly recommend that you go to the latest exam, download that, and work on that first. The reason for that is because that exam probably resembles and is very close to how the next exam is going to be. The older you go, the more you go in the past, the older the exams get, and some of the regulation changes as well. So it's best to begin with the latest exam and then kind of work your way backward. That way it kind of gives you an understanding of how the latest thing looks. So this is my recommendation, and this is exactly what I did. For your first exam, for every exam, first of all, go through and do the exam, which means work through the exam, find the answers, and then when you finish the exam, then look at the answer key and see how that helps you. So for this first exam, I would highly recommend sit down and go through the exam. Take as much time as you need. Okay, if it takes you 4 hours, great. If it takes you 6 hours, fine. If it takes you 16 hours, that's okay too. But work through the exam. Okay, make sure you understand. The thing is, like I've already mentioned, this exam is not about memorization. It's about kind of understanding where the information is coming from, then going to that section and answering the question. So take this time, work through the exam, and look up, try to figure out all the answers yourself. It's gonna help your brain going as well. Once you do that, then look at the answer key and go through every single question, even the ones you got right. go through every single question and see where that information actually came from. And that also means, when you go to the exam, you do find the answer, then highlight the regulation. When you go through the answers using the answer key and you come across the regulation, highlight that regulation. Also, remember, when I say highlight the regulation, I don't mean just highlight everything in one color. I'll give you a couple of suggestions on the next slide, and if you use that efficiently, it should be really beneficial to you. So do that with the first exam. Then if you feel like you have enough time, do the same thing with the second exam as well. But after the second exam, I need you to start working on improving that time. So rather than spending 8 hours on it, it should be maybe 6 hours. The next one can also be 6 hours. Then cut that down to maybe 5.5, and then 5. At the end, by the time you take the exam, you want to be able to cut that timing down to 4.5 hours maximum. Okay, so now let's jump to the next slide and let's talk about the highlighters and how to actually use them. So this is my recommendation. I am telling you exactly what I did to prepare for the exam, what I did to tackle the exam, and how I was able to pass that exam. This is my suggestion. I would ask you to get a couple of different highlighters. As you're actually doing the exams, the practice exams, as you're reviewing the answers using the answer key, you're going to be coming across regulations that matters. That is very essential to those questions. So when you come across that regulation, you need to highlight everything in a smart way. What does that mean? Number one, that means don't highlight a whole paragraph or even a whole sentence, to be honest. And make sure you don't highlight everything in one color. If you look at the slide, I'm giving you my recommendation on how to use the highlighters. In my case, when it came to yellow highlighters, I used that only for general information. When it came to green highlighters, I used that to highlight timing, such as 3 days to file the form, how many days you have. So when it comes to days, timing, that wording of the timing, 45 days, that would be green. For blue, I used blue to highlight all the customs form number. So every single time I would come across a custom form number, I would, as an example, it says custom form 214, custom form 216, I would highlight 216 and 214 in blue. When it came to red or orange, I used that for both money and penalty. Every time there was some kind of penalty or money or amount owed, stuff like that, that was highlighted in red. So the whole point of highlighting these things is when you're actually taking the exam, you can quickly go to that section, and with those highlights, certain words will pop up to you. When they pop up, you should be able to use those pop-ups to understand what that section or what that subsection is talking about. So for example, if you highlight something that talks about days to submit notice of exportation, so you would go to that paragraph. In yellow, you would highlight the main word that tells you what that paragraph is about. In green, you would highlight the number of days that you have. In blue, if they mention a form, I would highlight the form number. In red, if they mention a penalty, I would highlight that in red. So you're not going to highlight the whole thing in one color, and you're not going to highlight the whole thing even when it comes to using different highlighters. You have to be very concise and smart about using the highlighters properly, so that way it helps you at the end. And then you need to keep on doing that. You need to keep on taking more exams. Depending on your timeline, depending on that action plan that I asked you to make, you need to keep on pushing. Even when you're tired, even when someone's knocking on the door, you need to stay focused, okay? Because when it comes to passing the exam, it's all about analysis, about highlighting, about trying to figure out a way, how can you find the right answer more quickly. So as I mentioned to you, keep on doing those exams, but the main thing is actually analyzing what happens with those exams. So for example, you do 2 exams, then you realize you don't know nothing about evaluation. What do you need to do? You need to figure out a way to understand how to tackle those questions, okay? If you cannot do classification, you need to understand why you're not getting those questions right. So you need to spend a day trying to understand classification and why you're getting the stuff wrong. So stuff like that. If you just kind of begin the whole thing without labeling, without having a plan, and without even analyzing after every exam, then you're pretty much wasting time. You cannot keep on doing exam and hoping you will improve. You actually have to understand what you're doing wrong, and then you need to work on that topic. If you don't do that, then honestly you're wasting your time as well as your money as well. And that's not something I want you to do. So on this slide, I have listed out a couple of things that might be very beneficial to you. So you can pretty much use these things as growth strategies or something just to look at. Okay. When it comes to books, the actual regulations, you can buy them either from the governmental website, other courses, or you can go to my website and actually purchase the regulations, the actual books themselves, and I will ship them out to you. On top of that, on my website, I have a study guide which has pretty much compacted everything from the main sections into an understandable outline format, which will help you tremendously. In case you're interested, you can go ahead and buy that as well. The third thing on my website is Teams access. If you buy the Teams access, then you will have 24 hours access to me through Teams. As you're doing the exams, if you have any questions about the process, about any of the questions, you can actually type that question out, or tell me which exam, which question it was, and tell me that you need help on that, and I will respond to you as soon as I can through Teams access. On the other hand, I do have more courses on my website. If you go to the courses section, you will see each topic broken down by the topic it discusses. The reason why I spread out the topic in different sections rather than have one full course, because I wanted to give you something that works for you and something that's more flexible. I don't want you to pay $3,500 or $5,000 like other courses do, even though you need to understand what classification needs to be. I don't want you to pay that much money if you need to understand what valuation is, how to go on about tackling it. So if you're bad on something, go check out that section. It should have a topic for you. And if not now, then I'm working on making that topic come live onto that website. So keep an eye out on it. On the other hand, if for some reason you can't really afford the content or you can't pay for it, then if you go to my YouTube channel at the moment known as Brick Media, you can actually find a lot of great stuff on there as well, and that should be very beneficial to you in the long run. And honestly, if you do everything that I have told you, meaning action plan, labeling, highlighting, analysis of yourself, then I promise you will pass the exam. Now, I've told you I passed the October 2019 exam that had less than 4% pass rate. I passed the exam not because I'm some kind of genius. I'm just a regular guy just like you, and I put in the work to pass that exam. I worked really hard to make it happen. And the main reason for my success was self-analysis, whether it was analysis on how things should be categorized / labeled, how things should be highlighted, or understanding which topics I'm bad at and making sure I spend the time on those topics. I'm a guy just like you. So if I can pass the exam, to be honest, so can you. It doesn't matter what your background is, whether this is something that's new to you, something that you're kind of familiar with, or something you're already in. So at the end, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this course. If you like this course or anything about it, then I would highly recommend you check out my other courses, and if you can, pass along the word either in person or maybe post something on LinkedIn referring to this course or VTC and saying how great this is. Thank you so much for taking this course with me.